Clear your voice, Nick.
What I usually do in the beginning, before we start actually with a conversation, is that I like to take a few seconds just to tune in. Maybe if you want, close your eyes and breathe a little bit, and I'll tell you my intentions for this episode. And if you feel so, you can also share yours, but you're not obliged to do so. So I'm going to close my eyes. Feel free to do so as well and breathe a little bit, just so that we make sure we are in the same place.
Cool.
So my intention for today is, first of all, to get to know your story. And hopefully this will also help the team, the Mzingo team, to deliver a more appropriate, useful, and relevant result to you guys. And I would also love to educate people, and my audience in this case, about disability and inspiring all of us to build more empathy towards one another. So these are my intentions, and I'm very happy and grateful that you guys are here with me today, despite all the challenges. And feel free to open your eyes whenever you want, or if you want, share anything you would like. Are we good?
We're good.
Perfect. So welcome, Nicole and Nick. I feel very excited to connect with you today, and I'm very curious to see what we'll create together. I would like to begin, as I usually begin my conversations, explaining all the ways in which my guests inspire me and remind me to make sure I'm not sleepwalking through my waking state. I believe that in your case, I will have no trouble exploring all the reasons why you inspire me. Above all, I truly appreciate the kindness in your words, the positivity, and the passion. Indeed, you turn what many consider limitations into your strengths and your purpose. So thank you for being you and for connecting today.
Thank you.
So let's begin this conversation. I would like for this to be as open as possible, with you telling us a little bit of your story. So perhaps we can start with Nicole, and then we move on to Nick. What's your story, Nicole?
So hi, I'm Nicole, and I was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. Currently, I work in market research. I've been working in market research for about 7 years now. And then in addition to that, I also run Smurgas with Nick. We're both co-founders of the company. And from a personal perspective, I consider myself to be quite a sociable person. I'm a people's person. I enjoy connecting and hearing people's stories. I love watching movies and listening to podcasts. So that's me.
What about you, Nick?
Well, I'm Nick. If I'm in trouble, it's Nicholas. And I am a teacher by profession and passion. I teach maths during the day, and I'm a superhero at night. And I love dancing is also a passion of mine. I've been dancing for I think 18 years now. It's mainly salsa. Yes, I am a co-founder of Smurgas. And I also do public speaking, where I mostly focus on growth mindset and positivity and reframing your current situation and, achieving what you're truly capable of.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I will provide some context in the beginning of the episode, but I believe I should just make this clear. The reason why we're talking here today is because we're doing a project together. We're collaborating. I'm part of a summer program called Mzingo Virtual Summer Program, and I met you guys through Mzingo and because of Smergos. And before we go on and talk a little bit about Smergos, I believe the main intention of this episode is to let people know and get a little bit more educated towards disability. So maybe we can also explore that, and you can let us know what exactly is a disability, and how can you refer to a person with a disability, and when were you born with a disability, or it was something that happened throughout your life? Maybe we can start with Nicole. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so I think the official definition of a disability is either a physical or mental disability that somehow limits a person's sort of senses or mobility to perform daily tasks. And I think the correct term to refer to people with disabilities is to say people with disabilities, not to say disabled people, because when you say disabled people, you're kind of framing them that that's what they are. Where when you say a person with a disability, you're saying you're recognizing that they're an individual and that they happen to have a disability. And then just speaking from my personal story, so I'm permanently wheelchair bound. I was born with a genetic condition. The medical term is osteogenesis imperfecta. Otherwise, it's more commonly known as brittle bones, which is easier to remember. And basically, it has to do with my body doesn't produce enough type 1 collagen. And as a result, my bones are more fragile than the average person's. So I just need to be careful in my day-to-day life to not fall or be bumped too hard, because then it will more likely result in a fracture. Over to Nick.
With what Nicole said about saying people with disabilities rather than a disabled person, I totally agree with that. But just out of interest, Smergos ran a poll about this, almost this exact thing, about 2 months back. And we asked the general public, or the people that were following us on Facebook, what they prefer to be referred to as. The vast majority actually came back and said they really don't care, as long as you talk to them as a person. So my answer to that would just be call me Nick, rather than worrying about people with disabilities or, is he disabled or whatever. Nicole and I always joke about that. Like we are, yes, disability is part of our lives and it is part of who we are, but it doesn't define us. And so, just talk to us rather than focusing on the disability. My disability is I've got cerebral palsy with hemiplegia. Basically broken down, this means brain damaged and half paralyzed. And I know that sounds pretty hectic, but the right-hand side of my brain was damaged in a car accident when I was 7 months old, and this has affected the left-hand side of my body. And so I've got what you call gross motor movement, where I can move my arms and legs, but I don't have fine motor movement, so I can't move my fingers or my toes, my ankle or my wrist. So I can, move, just not the finer motor skills.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. And I wanted to introduce this because I have 1 second. I wanted to clarify this, and the reason why I asked you this about disability is that I have a person with a disability in my family. And I personally feel like, even knowing that person for years and years now, sometimes I feel awkward or uncomfortable at sometimes approaching the situation, and I don't know if I should just not talk about the issue or just ask directly to the person. What I usually try to do is talk directly to the person and see what should I ask or shouldn't I say. But in general, I believe there's a lot of assumptions people make towards disabilities and a lot of fears people have towards this issue because they don't know how to approach. So my purpose today is also to inform people And I wanted to ask you, because I know that here in Portugal, people are still very unaware towards accessibility and towards what disability is and what it means. And also that it doesn't mean that you can't have a life. And so I wanted to ask you, how is the situation in South Africa? How do you feel in South Africa? And in general, if you could share some of these misconceptions and assumptions people have towards disabilities, and even if you want, share some funny episode of just an absurd situation where a person was just making assumptions about you. So maybe, Nick, you're laughing, so I'll give you the word now.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'd like to talk to your first point,
Yes.
which is, for me personally, I prefer it if someone asks me, outright about my disability. As you said, it's there. It's something that bugs you, and normally we can see that it's bugging someone, and you can always see when a conversation is running with something else happening in the background. They might be talking to you, but every so often they're glancing at your hand or something. That's what happens with me, at least. And so I would rather we discuss it, straight from the word go. And how I normally do this is I have one or two icebreakers that just, make a joke of it. Like I call my limp, my 50-cent limp, it's a gangster limp, because every gangster, has this cool walk. Mine's built in. And then my friends call my arm the claw, from a Jim Carrey movie. And so, and I got an upgrade. So my arm used to be really bent, and now I've got a fused wrist. So, I talk about my arm being upgraded, half man, half machine kind of thing. And so that's what I, would prefer. When I was a kid, this is why I was chuckling, is when I was a kid in school, people used to make up the craziest stories, and it's not that they were trying to just be funny or anything. They literally didn't know what was going wrong, or what was going on. So, they would say you have breathing problems, because that's what made sense to them. Or another one was that I promise you this came out. My dad was in the army, and he came home and accidentally shot me in my arm, which is not the truth at all. But that was a story that came out because, again, that's what made sense to them. So, I think, to be clear, just ask about it, and it's better. Sure, you have to look at the person on a personal level. If they're very insecure about it, then you don't want to ask them. But where you can, I would say, be pretty upfront with them and say, I'm just curious, what happened to you, and then normally we would like to discuss it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What about you, Nicole?
So I must agree with Nick's sentiments. I do agree that, I would rather you just ask me. Like he said, you can kind of pick it up when they may be feeling a bit awkward, or they don't know how to say it. And honestly, I would say just ask me. And sometimes what I'll do, like Nick, is that if I can pick up that someone is a bit awkward, then I bring it up. Then I will just bring it up, and like Nick said, I will try to add a bit of humor or a bit of lightheartedness to it, so they don't, that it doesn't make them feel more uncomfortable or anything like that. And I think, because I think people do make a lot of assumptions. I think in my case, it's often that I must have been in a car accident. They don't realize that I was born with my disability, so they'll say things to me like, "Shame, so when was the accident?" Or something like that, and then I have to go, "No, I wasn't in an accident," And then to go back to one of the other questions that you asked about how things are in South Africa, it's interesting because you must remember, and Nick can also add on to this later, is we are very diverse culturally in South Africa. So I also think that you can't say that like one shoe fits all. I think it does vary across the different cultures. So I think that there are some cultures where perhaps there is still a bit more of a stigma attached to disability, where often the family members maybe don't know how to handle it. So they just end up keeping the disabled family member at home. And then they're like, okay, well, we just have to look after them because, you know, maybe they're not able to be educated or they're not able to work, where in fact they are. But I think it's just a lack of understanding. You know, I don't think it's coming from a malicious place. I think it's just people maybe need to be more educated about disability in that scenario. You know, in my personal experience, I was quite fortunate that I think my mom managed to get that very delicate balance right, where she never tried to underplay my disability. She always recognized that it was there, but like Nick mentioned earlier, she was like, it's a part of you, but it doesn't define you. So you're going to go to school and you can work and you can have friends and you can, you know, she never ever tried to stop me from doing that. And I think that was really, really important, you know. I don't know if Nick wants to add anything else here.
Just on the accessibility. So, you know, things are becoming slightly more accessible, you know, but it's still got a long way to go here in South Africa. You know, it's, I think it's a must now for buildings to be accessible, you know, in terms of like plans and things, but how the buildings actually are accessible is a different story, or how much they are accessible is a different story. Nicole and I have been to many buildings where they will say that they are wheelchair accessible, and then you get there and the first thing is you meet with the step at the entrance of the building. So you haven't even got into the building and then there's the step. And that's just one thing, because obviously we look at it from a wheelchair perspective quite often. But, you know, if you speak to people who are deaf or people who are blind, they'll have similar experiences. So I think we have quite a far way to go in terms of general accessibility, but I think we are slowly getting there.
Yes, and I have a couple, you raised some very interesting points. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, were you always so open about your disability? Because you were saying that you both prefer, the two of you prefer just being asked, or you introduce it with humor, but was it always the case for you, or there was a shift in your mindset towards
Nicole,
what Nick maybe would define as a growth mindset?
Yes. Sure, if I go first. So again, I think my circumstance is a bit different because I was born with my disability. So I didn't know anything else. So there wasn't like something that I could compare to from before. But I think growing up, I did have far more insecurities and issues about being disabled and being different. And all I wanted to do was just fit in, and I didn't. But I think it was a point that I reached in my life. I can't remember the exact age. I must have been maybe late teens, early 20s, that I did come to that acceptance, that this is my situation and it's not going to change. So what I do have in my power is, as Nick would say, my mindset. So I can choose to live my life to the best of my ability, and that was when I think I had the shift, and then I started to become a lot more open with it.
For me, I can honestly say it did start from a younger age. When I used to go to when I first went to school, I started in a special needs school. And then at the age of 8, I underwent some tests, and the psychologists and a whole bunch of other specialists said that I had the capabilities to be mainstreamed, which means to go to a normal school. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm 36 years old now, and back then, when I was a child, integrated schooling wasn't a thing. And so to have a disabled person or a person with a disability in a, in inverted commas, normal school, was different. And so when I was finally allowed into a normal school, I was luckily put with a remedial teacher in Standard 1. And I found it challenging, and the kids found it challenging as well. I went through quite a lot of teasing and things. And the teacher actually said to me, the only person who can change this is you. And if you don't tell them the story, then they're going to make up their own stories. And so in Standard 1, it wasn't for a prepared speech, or it wasn't for marks or anything. She got me to stand up and tell the class my story. And this was in Standard 1 when I was about 9 years old. And every year she called me back to her same Standard 1 class, and I had to give a speech to them every year until I finished school, because I was slowly educating the school on what it is to have a disability and my situation, so that it wasn't something strange to them. So I became used to talking about it quite early on.
Mm-hmm. That actually brings me to the other point I wanted to introduce, which was how then do we change things, both at a level of the mindset of people, but also in terms of accessibility of buildings. But I believe you answered the question, the importance of speaking up and normalizing disability the way you do. I think it's really the way to go. And what do you think? Of course, in your case, we're talking about South Africa. I'm curious to understand, how does change operate? Who pressures governments and the people who design the buildings for the buildings to be more accessible? Are they usually up to NGOs, or the government takes that into consideration and they make efforts? And how do you see things changing in the future? Nicole, if you want to
go. So from my understanding, it would actually be something that's driven by the governments. Mm-hmm. So we do have a minister that does look over people with disabilities, and I think that a lot of these regulations would be coming from that side, on being more accessible and things like that. And in terms of where the future goes, I mean, I think it's in my perspective, it's a bit of both. I mean, I still think there's a lot of importance from on the government, but I think it's also every individual. With every person that Nick and I have met, we have in some way changed their way of thinking. I've had so many friends that have said to me that after they met me, they began to see things differently, and when they saw someone parking in a disabled parking bay who wasn't disabled, they would confront them, or they would go to a building and they would suddenly recognize how inaccessible the place is. So I think it's one of those things that will fan out exponentially. So I think as disabled people start to become a bit more empowered and become more educated and start to become more integrated in the workplace, and as they meet more and more people, that's my perspective, that it will something that will be like it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Nicole was saying. In terms of making things change, unfortunately, changes, especially like physical accessibility changes, take money, and some companies are not going to be willing to spend that money just because they want to. So it would take something like a government policy to almost force them to do so. But I totally agree with what Nicole was saying. Yes, it has to come from the top down. So the government has to say, because of the SDGs and because of the United Nations and all of those, these things have to happen. But then I also think it has to happen from the bottom up. If we as people with disabilities just sit back and play the victim and say, oh, it's inaccessible, I'm not going to go, or whatever, then it's our fault as well. So we have to stand up and say, make this more accessible for us. We'll help you do that. And also that's a very important thing is, and I know Nicole will agree, is it doesn't have to be perfect. We just have to see that you've made an effort. We'll meet you halfway. We've gone to places where there's been a ramp, and it's been way too steep for a person in a wheelchair, but we've pushed, Nicole up. And we don't shout at the place or anything because the wheelchair ramp is too steep. At least there's a wheelchair ramp. And yes, there are ways to improve that and things, but, there are changes that need to happen from both sides.
Yes, and that's why Smergos exists, I believe. So maybe we can talk a little bit about Smergos. I open the question to whoever wants to speak. Can you let us know how Smergos was born? Okay, Nick, your turn.
It was, I think, about 8 years ago or so, where I was racking my brain for a birthday gift for Nicole. And we'd been pretty good friends for a while, and I knew that it had to be something cool. And I couldn't just go out and get her some average gift. That would be lame. And so for 2 or 3 weeks, I racked my brain and I couldn't think of anything. And this is a true story. At 7:30 on a Saturday morning, I was lying in bed, and I don't know if you've had that, but I woke up and I had the answer. It was there. I shut up and I was like, it has to be a wheelchair bag. Because a thing that bugged me, and because I saw it with Nicole, is Nicole with her wheelchair, things are always falling off it, getting lost, damaged, or broken, and so that's why the wheelchair bag was just a non-starter. It was a great idea, but then I also wanted something that could be personalized. Have something cool on the back, that's how I roll. And so I hopped onto Google while sitting in bed. I hopped onto Google and tried to find the bag. And I found 1 or 2 products locally, but they weren't really impressive. And then I did find some from overseas, but the problem is they weren't exactly what I was looking for. And also there was an overseas price tag. For those of you who are not South African, the exchange rate is definitely not in our favor. And so if you're buying something in US dollars, it costs a ton of money. And so, for me to look at buying Nicole something for a birthday gift that costs me 2,000 Rand is a non-starter. We're good friends, but not that good. And then with me being the person that I am, and my mindset that I have, maybe the average person would have gone, oh, well, I can't find it. But instead, what I did was I thought, hold on, there's an opportunity here. So again, this is a true story. Mm-hmm. I phoned Nicole and I said to her, be at my house at 3:00. I have something that I want to share with you that's going to change a lot of lives. And I hung up the phone because I'm a man of mystery. Luckily, she arrived at 3:00 because otherwise Smergos wouldn't have been born. But she arrived at 3:00 and I told her the idea, and we started from there. So that's where Smergos was born.
That's a beautiful story. I have to admit that during the program, we had to explain what we were doing, like we would be explaining to a 7-year-old, and we used your storytelling method of explaining the problem and how we would solve the problem.
Oh,
so
cool.
Thank you for sharing with us that beautiful story. And can you let us know on a more practical level, now that Smergos is already rolling, what do you do on a practical level, and how do you keep changing lives? So do you have the personalized products, the wheelchair products, and what else are you doing at the moment? Nicole?
Sure. So we started out with a range of wheelchair bags, and they varied styles. So you can get bigger ones that can fit onto the back of the wheelchair. So for example, if you wanted to carry a laptop or maybe some extra equipment, that's what it could be used for. And then we also have smaller bags that then are closer to the person's body, like more by their lap. so that then if you wanted to keep your cell phone or your wallet, then it's easily accessible for you. Since then, we have also expanded out to a raincoat poncho, because for anyone that is wheelchair bound that is listening to this, you'll know that an umbrella is not practical because you can't hold it and push at the same time. And neither is a raincoat, because all it does is just puddle, the water just puddles on your lap. So we designed the raincoat in such a way that it's angled, the fabric, so that it just flows off your lap. And we're also experimenting with some plastics, but we haven't launched those products yet. So really, these products, what they do is that they give the individual, more confidence, more independence, because they're able to move in the world with more mobility than they had before. We have also done some work with local disabled sports teams, where we design products that help them, for example, certain training equipment, or if we help them to carry, perhaps they've got spare wheels that they carry when they travel, we've designed bags like that as well. So that's the product side of it. Then we've also launched a more social side of it, which links into what we were talking about earlier about breaking down those barriers with people with disabilities and those without. So before the whole COVID pandemic happened, we did start to do these social events where we would do them in person, and it could be anything. It could be something like just meeting for a coffee, or it could be doing board games, but it was just to bring people together and create a sort of feeling of community and fun, But then the COVID pandemic hit. We were supposed to have our more recent event just as we went into lockdown in South Africa. And that was when Nick and I had the idea, well, then why don't we bring it online? Because people are at home. A lot of people are staying by themselves, so they need that opportunity to connect. So we've started to do these weekly online calls, Zoom calls. And again, we encourage everyone to join. And it's been really great. We've been growing in numbers. And in one of the calls, Nick actually also gave a talk on growth mindset, which was also very well received. Yeah, so I don't know if Nick wants to add anything to that.
The only thing I'd like to add is one other product that we want to really launch is the chair tee, which is a t-shirt for the wheelchair. And the idea behind that is you can pick from a range of different designs and things to print onto that t-shirt that's going to slip onto the back of your wheelchair. And I always explain it by saying, why do you wear the clothes you wear? It's to say something about yourself. And when a person is in a wheelchair, often their body gets almost absorbed by this big black or gray thing. And now you're giving them the opportunity to have their personality extended onto their chair. So the chair becomes part of their personality. And also it becomes a great icebreaker. For example, Nicole has one that says, "I can't stand sitting." And that's quite well received by the public. They'll come up, they'll chuckle, and then, they start chatting from there.
Yes, I love what you're doing. And above all, I love that you try to first understand what problems are there to solve and don't make any assumptions. And you could have just started Smergles and do one or two products, but it's very obvious that you, year by year, or even month by month, I believe, you try to understand what are the problems in the community and you try to solve them. And not even talking about the social responsibility work that you do and all the speeches and all the events. So one question I would like to ask you, because I personally feel more and more attracted to social enterprises. I think it's the way to go. Do you personally feel like this will be the future? Where do you think we will go in terms of this? Because it really seems like the only viable solution. I think the COVID-19, I don't know, in South Africa, my assumption is that it also accentuated all the differences and all the inequalities. So I open this question to you regarding social enterprises and the future of businesses.
Yes, absolutely. We've had the similar thing happen in South Africa, where, as you say, we've clearly seen the people that are suffering, and those class differences has really been brought to the front. And I think, now more than ever, I think people are looking to support brands that have a purpose or a meaning behind them, you know. They're almost called like micro influencers. So maybe you have between 1,000 and 3,000 followers, but it's those that are actually really valuable, because it's those 1,000 people that will support you and follow you throughout throughout your time, because they support what you're doing. So I do agree with you that I think now more than ever, social enterprises are going to be growing, and people want to support brands that are making a difference.
And and I wanted to also leave the question: where do you see Smergos in the future?
Well, obviously, it's going to be massive, and it's going to take over the world, and things like that. I mean, that goes without saying. But honestly, my image, and I've spoken to Nicole about this many times. I can paint you a picture of exactly what it's going to look like in the future. But very quickly, my image is one of those big airplane hangars that you get, and it's going to have a racetrack kind of thing inside it, and then around the outer edge are going to be all the different divisions that are working within the Smergos, so that they can operate next to each other, but also work with each other. So you can have the engineers working in the engineering side, and they can walk over to the 3D printing people and say, let's try this. And it's all on one level, so that everybody can move around freely. And everyone's an equal in terms of hierarchy. Obviously, we'll have managers and things, but in our company, as it is already, we don't have a very strict hierarchy. We're all in here, we're all working together, and so that kind of thing would happen there as well. And so that's the idea, the pie in the sky idea. But also from a general perspective, obviously right now we are producing accessories for wheelchairs, because that's kind of easy for us because of Nicole's life experiences. But we do aim to eventually diversify our products to meet the needs of many different disabilities. For example, my disability, and not only physical disabilities, but mental disabilities as well, because my sister has Down syndrome, and I see the challenges that she goes through. And so, we want to create job opportunities for people with disabilities. We want to create products for the people with disabilities, break down barriers, and make the world, more equal. And I think that's the big idea for Smergos.
Yes, sounds like a very cool idea.
Thank you.
And on a different note, and on a very personal one as well, do you ever get tired of talking about your disability? Because I assume that people, it's the first thing that they talk about, or that you feel like you should introduce to make the other person comfortable. And I wonder how does that make you feel?
I don't think that I get tired of it, to be honest with you. I do understand what you're saying, that you have to repeat the story often, especially myself, being single, and then meeting, every time I meet a guy, then I have to go through the whole thing of explaining it again. But I wouldn't say that I get tired of it. I almost think I go into autopilot.
Yeah.
Like I think I kind of just go into autopilot, and I know it so well now that I just go through the motions, I would say. I don't know if Nick agrees.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
and
but I'm tired of it.
Mm-hmm. And now, more on a final note, Nicole, What final message would you like to give to people regarding disability, accessibility, or really just in general? If you could give a message to everyone on Earth, what would that message be?
No pressure. I think it would just be to that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the fear that people have, and I understand why it's there. I don't judge it at all, but I think it's trying to, I would say, perhaps be more open-minded and just be more, sort of put those feelings of fear aside, and just be open to speaking and connecting with people that maybe don't look or sound the same way that you do, but they're still a human being, and just be a little bit kind to everyone every day. I think that's the most important thing. And I think the change is happening. I think we have progressed. If we had to think where we were with disability, perhaps a generation or two ago from now, I think we have progressed. As I said, I think while there is still a lot to be done, I think we have made improvements, and people with disabilities are becoming more integrated into general society than they were before. So I think it's just a case of just pushing that. And like we spoke about before, it comes from both sides. So it comes from the people with the disabilities, but also within society as a whole, that would break down those barriers,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's from me.
Thank you for your answer. I agree with you very much. And finally, Nick, adding to what Nicole said, what would an ideal world look like to you? Having all of this in mind. And we already know about Smergos, of course.
Yeah. I think I would like to answer it from a slightly different angle, in terms of like what I'd like to, share with people is my life mantras. I have two of them. The first, and the one that drives me the most, is the greatest risk is not taking one. And that drives me every day to do almost anything. If I feel that I sit and I wonder, or I think, what if, I immediately step out of that and I say, I've got to do it. Because the greatest risk is not taking one. And the important thing, and it does link to what Nicole was saying, is, linking to fear. Yes, of course, there's going to be fear. And yes, of course, you can risk failure. But the whole thing about it is, and especially, being a person with a disability, you fail more often than not, when you're doing something. And that is to accept that that's going to happen. And also to accept that life is a sum of all your experiences. And so if you sit in a cushioned area and you don't take risks and you don't live life, then you don't have a life to live. So rather go out there and, take life on, take the risks, and learn from them. And then you can also make active decisions and active choices based on those experiences. So, try something out, and if it works, great. But if it doesn't, that's okay. And if you want to do it again, you've learned from that experience and you'll change your approach. Or you'll do it and then you'll find out, actually, it didn't work. And now I know I don't want to do it. So that's the one thing. And then the other is that I also say that every challenge is an obstacle waiting to be overcome. Again, just saying, if you want to really do it, you will find a way to do it. You might not find the usual way, but you will find a way. Just a funny example for me is, if I had to give you a bottle with a screw-on cap and ask you to open the bottle, you would take it, put it in the one hand, and take your other hand and open it, right? And if I had to ask you to do this in 5 different ways, you probably wouldn't be able to. However, I do personally have 5 different ways of opening a bottle, which is a screw cap. And that's because I've had to. Again, every obstacle is a challenge waiting to be overcome. I want that bottle open. I'm going to figure out a way to do that.
Yes, Thank you. I believe this is a lesson for anyone, really, about fear, about courage, about how to overcome challenges, like you were saying. I think this is the way to end it, really. You said it all, Nick and Nicole.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. It was really a pleasure having you here and having this honest conversation with you. From the bottom of my heart, I'm truly grateful for this opportunity. And I hope you enjoyed as well.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity as well. I mean, I kind of feel like a superstar.
Okay, perfect. And finally, thank you, dear listener, for connecting with us. And I hope you enjoy as much as at least I did. And wishing you a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
This is stop recording. I see. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, no, say
Tell
it
me,
again.
Nicole.
Say it again.
No,
I
it's
can't
okay. It's
remember
okay.
what I
It's
said.
okay. No.
Yeah, no, it's really well put. I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, I'm single, and I think dating is hard enough as it is. But I think when you don't have a disability, a lot of people, how do I say, like they put their best selves first when you first meet someone, and whatever baggage or issues that they have, they sort of hide it and then only expose it later.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that option, as Nick said. It's like, here I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll either find guys that go, oh, that's not for me, or you'll get the guys that go, that's cool, I'm open to that, And as you said, it really is a bullshit
Bullshit
filter.
filter.
And I think that's what, like Nick was saying, is that I think, how do I say, the friendships that we have are really meaningful. Like, I have the most amazing group of friends. And none of them are superficial people, none of them, as you say, are worried about looking cool on Instagram and, and all that kind of thing. And so I think maybe the quality of our relationships are more meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I wanted to add on what you were saying, I don't know, I always saw in my bubble a lot of superficiality, and I always wondered why, because I remember after being more aware of all societal issues that there was some point that I didn't pay attention. Okay. And so what I'm interested in is, why are people not aware, how to change that, and how can we make the case that it's actually better for them to be more aware for their own happiness as well. And this brings me back to the conversation of social businesses. I feel like so many people misunderstand the point of nonprofits and social businesses, because ultimately, like, what I recognize in society, I see people who are driven by purpose and people who are driven by profit. The people who are driven just by profit, they ended up having miserable lives because they don't have real connections. And then even if you get less money, but you do have a meaning, you do have a group of people that is aligned with your purpose, then because your life is your of service, because you see the real impact you have on people, then you're like happier. And ultimately, I don't know, I really appreciate these conversations, because I always feel like I can learn and build more empathy, and that empathy, I like building patterns amongst different things and recognizing how we're all one at the same, we are very similar, we can always make connections. And I wanted to thank you also for the articles that you shared and the TED Talks and the mutuality mindset and the opportunity makers, because I really see myself, I really recognize myself in that. And I'm very happy with the team, I have to say as well, the Smergos project we're doing, and let's see what this turns into, even though it's very short. I'm just very excited and happy I'm here chatting with you guys, to be honest.
There was something I was going to add to what you were saying now, and now I've forgotten it. Damn it. Nicole, do you have anything to add? Because I need to remember what I was going to say.
Maybe it was on because I think I didn't make it very clear. I just feel like a lot of people are numb. They are not aware because they're kind of sleepwalking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think there are two things there. Firstly, to talk about your awareness side of things. You said because you have a person with a disability in your family, you're more aware of it. And I actually, again, this is something I speak on, and it is called, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but if you haven't, you should look it up. It's your RAS, your reticular activating system.
Okay.
Now, every single person has a reticular activating system. And what it does is it's basically the gatekeeper between your senses and your conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by this is your body, or your brain rather, is being fed information from all 5 senses all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 24/7, even while you're sleeping. Okay, and your RAS filters out what it deems to be worthy of your conscious mind and what it doesn't. And it's almost like compressing files on a computer. You know, let's say you've got 10 gigs of information that's being fed into your brain, and your RAS condenses that 10 gigs into, 20 megs.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've lost a whole bunch of context, right? But your RAS is choosing what to feed you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can program your RAS to become more aware of certain things. And you also, by understanding your RAS, or by acknowledging that it exists, you can also see its bias.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, because you have interaction with a person with a disability, you are now more aware of people with disabilities because your RAS is aware of it. The classic example, and I'm using it in my speech that I'm giving in 2 weeks' time, is buying a car. When you buy a car, before you've made the choice, you're not really aware of it on the roads. But when you've kind of almost made that, it's going to be my car kind of decision, you start seeing it all over the place. And now it's not because there are suddenly more of that car on the road. It's because your RAS is looking for those cars for you. And that's called confirmation bias. It's to bring your brain comfort, to let your brain know that you've made the right choice. And again, that's the RAS.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's very important. The more we interact with people, the more we expose people to people with disabilities, accessibility, and all those other things, the more it'll become commonplace and not something strange. And then in terms of your comment about companies for profit and then social companies, I listened to a talk quite a while ago that argued the point that why do they have to be different? Why can't a social company be driven by both profit and making a social difference?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big problem that we have is, you've got NGOs or non-government organizations or, donation-based things, and everybody sees them as almost bad, and they're by definition not really meant to make a profit. But the truth is, why not? And I'm not saying that, all donation-based things need to make a profit. But the thing is, in order for them to be successful and make more change, surely they need to have some form of profit to make it better, to make it bigger, to make it more viable for investors. And then likewise, if you take a company that's making a lot of profit, why can't they do the opposite? Why can't they say, we're making a lot of profit, now let's shift some of that to become a social side? So it can happen as much from an NGO to making profit side, but also from a profit side to moving into a more social space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No,
Yes.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah. And I had a class on conscious leadership and conscious capitalism. If you need to go, tell me.
No,
I don't want to steal. Okay. And one of the things we talked about, because I'm very curious to see where the future of businesses, what it will be like. But I feel like just like people evolve, and I gave this example actually in the class, and we have the Maslow pyramid of needs that humans self-actualize, and when they have their basic needs assured, they can then evolve and go up the pyramid. I also I thought of the same thing about corporations. Like, once we had to make corporations, we had to organize groups of people to serve the needs, and they would create profit. But just like that happened, it doesn't mean that we have to stay the same. And then now we can evolve to just combine NGOs with normal companies and continue to produce, because we need the production part, but also with the social responsibility part, and not as some bullshit thing. So I really hope that's the future. Let's see.
I think that's very cool. What you said now is true, and I do think it's possible. So if I had to give you some advice, I would say research that a bit more, find out what there is around that, and if there isn't something, I would ask you to build it yourself. Turn it into your own concept, because maybe you can release it as a project at a later stage or something. I think it would be really cool.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Anything else you want to
add? No, just be cool.
Yeah, and just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it this time.
No, it's cool.
And I really want to go to South Africa.
You have to. You have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,